Shana Tova. This talk is about 3 words. 3 words that I hope will inspire you to leave this sanctuary, after I'm done speaking, of course. Go out into the world and be the best of you. These 3 4-lettered words, that's right, 4-lettered words. These 3 4-letter words can make a difference in your life. Because these words are, as Rabbi Akiva thought of it, the guiding principle of the entire Torah. And when you hear them, you may think, really? That's it? But the more I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion, yeah, this is it. Live with love. Sounds really simple. Live with love. I do that every day, you're thinking. I love people. Some of you might even say, I love my family, I love my friends, I love my coworkers, I love my dog. And yes, that may be true, and I'm sure you love them, but do you really live with love in all of your interactions with your family and your friends and your coworkers and your dog? Actually, when I wrote that, I realized that the only one of that list that you actually do live with love is the dog. And I would also imagine that there are some here who don't have family or friends closely around them for so many reasons, but that doesn't matter for the sake of these 3 words. To live with love is a disposition. It's a mindset. It's an awareness of every single interaction. I don't think it's easy. I think it's a very difficult endeavor. But as I see it, 2 things need to happen in order for us to live with love. 1, we must allow ourselves to release the negative influences that prevent us from living with love. And then 2, we must learn how to positively live with love as a natural way of our existence. Now, I'm going to tackle the first today, getting rid of those negative influences. And then on Yom Kippur, we'll look at the second. And this way, it'll give you something to kind of think about. And then when we come up next week and you're delving into those negative influences that keep you from being your best self, you can come out of Yom Kippur inspired to be that best self, armed with a battle cry that comes from inside of you. Live with love. That's a battle cry from inside of you. So the entire theme was cast from the line that Rabbi Geller introduced to us last night. It comes from the Holiness Code in Leviticus, 19:18 in Leviticus. Love your fellow as yourself. Last night, Rabbi Geller translated fellow as neighbor, but I actually feel there is a word for neighbor that's different than is in this Leviticus text, and I kind of wanted to universalize it. So fellow, other person, love everybody around you as yourself. Last night, Rabbi Geller spoke about the meaning of this verse a lot more, and as I mentioned earlier, Rabbi Akiva called this idea, love your fellow as yourself, the central principle in all of the Torah. But I want to draw your attention to something else. The fact that this is, according to Maimonides, the 206th commandment in the Torah. It is not the 206th suggestion. It's not the 206th piece of advice or recommendation. It's a commandment. Like, do not murder is a commandment. Or don't steal is a commandment. It's one of those have-to-dos from the Torah, and yet it's been relegated to something that might come up in a conversation through its popular name, the Golden Rule. But do any of us really think of this as a rule or as a pithy statement that just seems right? You may be thinking that when I said, love your fellow as yourself, when I said that that was the golden rule, that I might have been mistaken. But the fact is, love your fellow as yourself is the original. The other versions were basically interpretations of this phrase, and they were written hundreds of years later. Here's one. Do unto others as you would have them do to you. That's the one that you thought I was going to say is the golden rule, right? That is from Matthew 7:12. Alas, I will not be interpreting that verse in synagogue on Rosh Hashanah. I'm very sorry. I imagine, however, that almost all of us in the room have heard that phrase a lot, and it makes sense that we would hear that phrase, because Christian values and superstitions and idioms are built into our American culture. But in the Jewish world, around the same era that Matthew text was written, we find this text from the Talmud 31a, for anyone who would like to check it. The story is told of a Gentile who came before Shammai, who was one of the great rabbis in the early part of the 1st century BCE. And he said to him, I will convert on the condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. Shammai drove him away with a builder's rod that he happened to have in his hand. Then he came before Hillel. He converted him. He said to him, that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the entire Torah. Now the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. We're not going to examine those last two sentences. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Because that's about, I think, Judaism's core as the conversation between ancient texts over centuries and the power that comes from the interaction of generations. But that's another sermon. That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. What I love about the negative version of this phrase is that if we choose to live by it, it can protect us from being hypocritical. If we don't like someone's behavior towards us, then we must never behave like that towards someone else. It forces us to use one lens when we're judging others and when we're judging ourselves. So I ask you, what is hateful to you? What do you really, really dislike when it happens to you? I feel like there are some dislikes that are universal in a free society like ours. I may be wrong, but I believe that no person likes to be singled out or bullied or stereotyped. No one likes to be thought of as inferior or not worthy of participating or different or not normal. Would any of you here enjoy having your freedom stripped from you? Who likes to be injured or shot or pushed around or abused or snubbed or ignored or treated with scorn? And do any of us in this room enjoy when people gossip about us or when people make fun of us or judge us? Who wants to be cheated, stolen from, or paid less than the person sitting next to them for the same work? But all of that's happening. People are being ripped off, extorted, ignored, taken advantage of. The world is filled with bigotry and racism and sexism and persecution and hatred and intolerance and injustice and violence and war. You all know what I'm talking about. Every day we see it on the TV and we see it on our smart devices that are with us every moment. This is why I want us to live with love, because we're on this planet for a precious short time. And to spend that precious time with hostility and anger and emotional pain and suffering, that just doesn't make sense to me. If we live with love, perhaps we make the world a little less painful, a little less hurtful. Because I believe the world is changed one person at a time. I believe when the Talmud says, if you have saved one life, it's as if you have saved the world. For me, it could be, if you have changed one life, it is as if you have changed the world. And so I ask that we all start to, from today, live with love. And maybe that love that we put out there is going to be accepted and passed through our interactions, one person to another. And it's imaginable, I believe it, it's imaginable that we can start a little epidemic that helps make this world better. So, I'd like us to do 3 things. I'm making it easy. 3 things that I'd like us to do to begin living with a goal to live with love. First, discover what's hateful to you. When you go home today, tomorrow, whatever you do, before Yom Kippur, write down all the things that are hateful to you. Make a list of the behaviors and reflect on whether you do some of them. And if you identify those deeds that you do that are distasteful to you in general, start to concentrate on those behaviors. And frankly, I can't imagine any of us in this room have a very long list of distasteful conduct. So it makes concentrating on this, I think, more attainable. I think it's going to be attainable for every one of us in this room. So that's 1. 2, I want to begin a community effort to curb 2 behaviors. 1, being judgmental. 2, gossip. I pick these 2 because I feel like so many times the road to hatred begins there. Being judgmental, it leads someone to gossip. When you hear gossip, it leads you to being judgmental. Both of them lead to hatred. Now, I realize that we are constantly making judgments throughout our lives, and they're not necessarily negative. Much of our life is a series of judgments that we make towards our betterment in this world. But to be judgmental is a different thing. This is what Dr. Greg Enriquez of James Madison University writes in Psychology Today. I tried to find something that was easy that we could kind of grab onto. He writes, quote, "The other meaning of judgmental, other than the fact that we actually go through our judgments constantly, the other meaning of judgmental has to do with being overly critical in an unhelpful way." Overly critical in an unhelpful way. It is when we make judgments in ways that have a harmful or negative consequence that we are being judgmental in ways that are best to avoid, he says, end quote. Another way of thinking about being judgmental, if that one doesn't work, is when your judgments have the consequence of making the other person feel problematically diminished. So think about that. Now let's talk about gossip. I don't know if this needs further explanation. Almost a decade ago, you all remember the sermon I did on gossip? So I don't know if I need to go through with it, but I'm going to anyway. For the purposes of this endeavor, I have gotten it down to one question. One question that you need to ask yourself if you're about to talk about someone who isn't there. If you're talking about someone who's there, it is not gossip, it is not lashon hara. It may be rude, but it's not gossip, okay? So the first prerequisite is the person's not there. Here's the question I want you to ask. I will say it twice so that it sticks with you. Will what I am about to say cause the person hearing it to feel negatively towards the person spoken about? I'll say it again with one different word. Will what I am about to say cause the person hearing it to feel hatred towards the person spoken about? Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I think if you ask that one question before you're about to say something to someone, that might get rid of 70 to 80% of all gossip that we do. Third is to keep a mnemonic device to help you remember, live with love. Temple Emanuel is going to help you with that. Cantor Weiss. This is kind of like when you call for rings at a wedding. Thank you. Thank you, Carol Merrill. We have these wristbands. It says on them, live with love. That's a reminder. It also has the nice little Ahava logo, and on the back, if you don't know, that's our website. So if someone else sees it, you can send them to our website. So we have 3 colors here. We have red, white, and blue. After all, it is an election year. And so we thought originally they were going to be just red and blue, but I thought that might be contentious with some of our congregants as to which color they would choose. So we're going with red, white, and blue. You have your choice. They will be for you as you go out. You wear this and you look down on it, at it, and hopefully it'll remind you to think about those negative things that get in your way. And it will remind you as you move forward to live with love. So there it is. That's the challenge of 5777. Live with love. We have 3 agreements as far as I can see it. First agreement, identify what kind of actions towards you are hateful to you. That's the first thing we have to do. Second, at least for these 10 days, let's try to stay away from being negatively judgmental and gossiping. And then third, wear the bracelet. Look down at it and remember. I know some of you might be skeptical about this live with love. I know it. It's a catchy phrase, and the word love, sometimes it gets a little bit corny perhaps, and maybe it is. And maybe this whole concept is me in an ivory tower. Maybe I'm not in touch with what's going on in the world, that I believe in love over hate and fear. But as I thought about this whole concept, I always came back to the same idea that almost 3,000 years ago, our ancestors decreed, love your fellow as yourself, to combat the hatred and violence in their world. And perhaps because of that, we're here in 2016 trying to be the best versions of ourselves and trying to live with love. So I'd like to end with some words about love. A friend received this from Rabbi Emeritus Jack Reimer of Valley Beth Shalom. I don't know if he wrote it. He didn't claim that he did, but I want you to hear this before I end. When you love, give it everything you've got. And when you've reached your limit, give it more. And forget the pain of it. Because as you face your death, it is only the love that you have given and received which will count. All the rest, the achievements, the struggles, the fights, will be forgotten. And if you have lived well, then it will be worth it. And the joy of it will last through the end. But if you have not, then death will always come too soon and be too terrible to face. Shana Tova. Live with love.